Hello, and thank you for joining our panel, Check Your Bias, Reading and Editing Mindfully. My name is Stephanie, and I'll be the panel moderator today. I have four amazing panelists with me, so if you have any questions for them as we continue to talk today during our panel, please feel free to drop them in the Discord chat, and we will make sure to answer them. So before we begin, please let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Briana N. Cox, who is the oldest of seven children and a first-generation academic. She holds a BA in Cognitive Science from Swarthmore College and an MS in Speech Language Pathology from Purdue University. Briana has been a writing fellow, won Best Script at the San Francisco Independent Film Festival, and Best Tennessee Writer at the Nashville Film Festival. They have additionally been highlighted in Variety Magazine and on the 2024 Next list of screenwriters to watch. Briana writes genre stories from the margins, illuminating the experiences of overlooked demographics with authenticity, dignity, and dark humor. Her debut novel, horror novel Indigent, was released in March 2026. Welcome, Briana.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Next, we have Priscilla Thomas, who is a Desi writer currently based in Yucatan, Mexico. She is the founder and co-facilitator of Campfire Creatives, dedicated to providing transformational virtual writing retreats and education to writers of all genres. Her writing has been nominated for Pushcart and Best of the Net prizes. She spends her non-writing time being bullied by feral cats and training to be as strong as the 80-year-old woman who beat up a home invader. Priscilla, please thank your feral cats on our behalf for allowing you to be here with us today.
Thank you. They are all watching me very closely right now.
As expected. Our next panelist, Lara Ameen, is a screenwriter, novelist, short fiction writer, sensitivity authenticity reader, and holds a PhD in education with a disability studies emphasis from Chapman University. She received an MFA in screenwriting from California State University, Northridge. Her YA contemporary fantasy novel Spare was awarded a Disabled Writers Grant from Suffering the Silence. She writes one-hour TV drama pilots alongside fantasy and contemporary romance novels featuring asexual, disabled, and Egyptian main characters who are often dealing with grief while investigating the supernatural. An online writing instructor and fiction editor with Women on Writing, she has given lectures and presentations on disability representation in TV, film, and fiction. She made her traditional publishing debut as a contributor to the 2024 Lambda Literary Finalist Young Adult Multi-Genre Anthology Being Ace, published by Page Street YA. Welcome to the panel, Lara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk with everybody.
Thank you. We're excited as well. And finally, we have Robin LeeAnn, a disabled demi-romantic ace who writes and edits. She writes Dragon Editing Services, which offers developmental editing, copy editing, and proofreading for fantasy and sci-fi books. She also runs a monthly giveaway to edit a query letter for free for LGBTQIA+ and or disabled writers. When she's not writing or editing, you can usually find her doing one of her million other hobbies while surrounded by her puppies. Welcome, Robin. Please feel free to offer puppy talks at any point today.
Thank you for having me. I put them in the other room though because they work. But
Smart.
yeah.
All right. So, panelists, we've come together to talk about how to check your bias so you can read and edit mindfully. Why don't we go ahead and get to our questions? The first of which is, can you tell us a little bit about your editing experience? And Brianna, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, definitely. So I am relatively new to editing prose, but I've been working as like a script puncher upper person for quite a while at this point. So like redlining scripts, providing feedback in that way. for theater and film and television has been something that I have been doing for almost 7 years at this point. So I'm feeling old. So I have started getting more into developmental editing for novel writing since starting my own writing workshops that are based around like the bigger pictures of like character consistency and thematic consistency. So that's usually where I live in my editing process for film and TV and theater and books. And that was very rambly, but hopefully that answered the question.
100%. Yes. Thank you. Great experience to share. Thank you. Priscilla, how about you?
I have been doing developmental editing for writers of memoir and realistic fiction. Tends to be that kind of like confessional fiction or first person fiction. Some of my favorite stuff to read. For I would say I did not actually map this out, but I am also feeling the depth of my experience right now, probably a little over 10 years. I was a high school English teacher for over 15 years, and that kind of made, I think even before that, I was sort of like this go-to person for like, hey, I need your eyes on this for my other writer friends. But in too long ago, my friend and I were working on books at the same time. I was working on Gathering. Over there. There, it's over there. And my friend was working on a really beautiful book she was moving it from a spoken word piece to a written piece. And we started as sort of like book editing buddies. And that's how I started getting into developmental editing. So I had previously done line editing kind of work, but I hadn't thought about what I really considered like part of a role of like a person in a writing community is like the person you can talk through ideas with and see like what does make sense to come next. And to realize that there was a word for that and a term for it in the world of editing was really exciting for me. And after I worked with my friend on this book, that just became a thing that people started to know about me. So I reached out to see if there were other people who were looking for that kind of coaching or editing in their books. And I've been really lucky to work with several authors on a variety of different kinds of books since then. And it's just one of my favorite things to do is to take these long form pieces and books from I have this weird idea or I have this kind of idea I've never told anybody into this could be a book in the world.
Lara, how about you?
So I started in 2019, but I would go to a lot of writing conferences like before COVID because I'd be invited to speak at writing conferences like all over in California and like Los Angeles and stuff like that, and would have to drive up there because I'm in Orange County. And one of the conferences that I went to, I remember being at that conference and speaking on a panel about disability representation and stuff with other authors, and someone had said to me, have you ever considered being a sensitivity reader? And I was like, what is that? Like, I don't know what that is. What is that? And they were kind of telling me about it, and I was like, well, how do you get a job doing that? Like, how do you, and they're like, well, you can like, just put your name out there and say that you can help authors, help screenwriters, whatever. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. And it took me about 2 years, because this was 2017, it took me about 2 years until I got that first job. I had reached out to an editor on Twitter who said they were looking for someone to sensitivity read for a character who used a wheelchair in a middle grade novel. They actually had me send them my resume and stuff, and we got set up to do the job. So that was my first job, and then she referred me to an author who had me sensitivity read her book, and that book ended up being indie published recently, so that's cool. Ended up getting my name put into databases like Penguin Random House has an authenticity reader database, so I got my name into that. I've also put my name in other databases. There's Firefly sensitivity readers. There's another one. I wrote an article for Women on Writing about how to become a sensitivity reader. Unfortunately, do not have my own website yet, but I do have like a web page of my sensitivity rating services, and some other people have found me through that. And I also, because I'm never going to hear another sensitivity reader probably mention this, I had a friend who was a sensitivity reader reach out to me, and this was last year, and he said, "Hey, I do sensitivity reading for college textbooks, and like it's the most money that I've made doing sensitivity reading, and it's like good. They pay on time and everything." So I was doing sensitivity reads for McGraw-Hill College textbooks last year. We used the Chicago Manual of Style to look at biases in language and things like that. So that was like sort of my beginning exposure to that. And then I had been doing some teaching for women on writing, teaching workshops with them and stuff like that. And the coordinator reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to do edits for flash fiction critiques?" That like they do these critiques. They have these contests, and so I started doing that, and I was like, "Oh, I really like this type of editing." So I reached out to several people. One of them was actually Robin. It's so nice to see you. I reached out to several people and I said, "Hey, I think I'm actually interested in copy editing because I had been doing this editing for women on writing. Like I have done like paid beta reads. I did it for an author friend. I'd love to do more of that, but I would just love to like grow more in that." But I think a lot of it, as I'm sure we'll talk about later in this panel, a lot of with getting these types of jobs, a lot of it is just luck and how to promote yourself and barging into people's inboxes and saying like, "Hey, I'm available," that kind of stuff. So that's how I've kind of gotten started. And
Jumping to Robin. How about you, Robin?
Hey, I've been editing for 5 years for freelancing, so actually this month. And then I've been editing in total for 10 years this September. So I've been also here for quite a while. I started at my university, actually, University of North Texas. I was working for their student-run journal then. I did nonfiction editing at that time. And then I also interned for their press. So I got to go around and be with every part of the publishing process from acquisitions to editing to marketing and get to see the whole full picture. And then after I graduated, I started interning for unsolicited press for about 3 years before I went full time into freelancing, where I've been since. I got on Reedsy as well not long after that, where I get a decent amount of people. But I've been to countless conferences, webinars, classes every year, just about.
Amazing. Okay, so as our conference attendees can see, our panelists today have wide experiences and diversity with the genres, formats, and experience that they have. So we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty details. And the first question in that regard is specifically on our topic, why is it important to check your own biases while you're doing this editing and reading work? Priscilla, can we start with you this time?
I always think about what I'm bringing to a reading, even if I'm reading it for pleasure. Like I always think about what am I coming in with, and it's always a little surprising to me that people don't do that, not in a judgmental way, in a like, wow, our brains all work differently kind of way. I can't imagine not thinking about what I'm going to read. And then when it comes to something like editing, if someone's asking me to work on their work with them, it just feels like a layer of care that's really necessary. If I'm going to offer any kind of feedback to someone's work, that I have to do that from a place of care for the work and care for the creator, care for the writer, because otherwise I can't imagine it being useful. And when I think about that as a writer, like the least useful feedback to me has been delivered from this place of just, of someone who just hasn't bothered to think about what they're bringing to the page, and they've just like made assumptions and run with them, and essentially have developed a completely different idea of the story. And so I think having that experience too, of being a marginalized writer who's been misunderstood, sometimes deliberately, sometimes out of good faith, but just not it just hasn't clicked because someone hasn't bothered to do that or thought to do that or hasn't been in a position where they've had to think about the world and how they relate to it. And when someone like that has given me feedback that it's been so unhelpful and sometimes harmful, that having that experience as a writer has made it really kind of just essential to my approach as an editor. And even if it's someone just asking me to give something a once over, like I have to think about that, like what am I bringing into this? And like anybody, I have strong opinions. So if I know that something is going to push a button of mine, but someone's asking me for some kind of feedback or some kind of support, I feel like it's my responsibility to acknowledge, like, okay, this is what I'm bringing to this piece already. Because otherwise I won't be able to look at it with any kind of helpful critical lens. And I think that's at the center of it, really. That's what we're trying to do as editors, is to be helpful and supportive of the work. That's not always how people interpret your editing feedback, but that is definitely what's at the heart of that feedback. So that's why it's been such an essential part of the approach for me.
Makes sense. And I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people watching as well. So thank you. Lara, how about for you?
I mean, I guess I can use this example from my own writing because this is something that came up. So I'm working on a novel right now, but I remember sending like an early draft to a friend of mine, and my story kind of takes place in like early 2000s, early mid like 2000s, like before 2010 at UC Berkeley because I did my undergrad there. There's like some areas there, and there are some names of things that we like called certain things at the time, and my friend had flagged it. Like, she wasn't doing a sensitivity read, but she flagged it as like, hey, maybe this is, maybe this is problematic because like the name of it, I was like, oh, wow, shit, like. And I hadn't thought about it because I was like, that was just what we called it back then. Like, and I don't want to be offensive. Like, that's the last thing I want to be because I'm very aware of things like ableist language and other types of things, and even, other types of language, even if I'm not sensitivity reading for that or flagging that, like, I like to make authors aware of it. So when I saw this in my own writing, I was like, oh wow, I need to take this out because I need to be respectful of, these like other communities, and I don't want to unintentionally cause harm. I am so aware of like ableist language and some other things right now that I wasn't aware of even, 10 years ago. Like, if you look at my published master's thesis script, it has ableist language in it, full stop. Like, I didn't know back then, and I was a disability activist, advocate, whatever. Like, back then, like, we all, and I'm sure that I think this question is coming up too, we all, like, things change and language changes, and I think how I've learned is, like, I've learned from other disability advocates and other people in marginalized communities of, either on social media or through other things of, like, how to, how to recognize my own biases, like, through learning from other people. You can edit a client's work and point out problematic language or point out these things with our own biases, and still the author might not necessarily fix it. And that, like, there's only so much you can do. Like, you can point it out, but it's up to the author if they want to fix it or not.
Relatable part of the process. Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Okay, Robin, how about for you?
I think it's important because we're writing for like the whole world nowadays, especially with technology. Like, we're not writing a book that's only going to be published in like our small community, but we're writing a book that like anyone in the world can pick up. And when you're writing for the world, it's important not to harm or exclude anyone, to not like a stereotype or a stigma live, but to challenge it. Readers aren't going to want to finish a book that hurts them or unintentionally is cruel. But even more to that, some readers don't even know the effects of stereotypes or harm. And they internalize that hate or that harm and bring it to their outside world. Books don't just take us to another world, but transform the way we think and how we experience the world. And taking that bias out of books helps eliminate some of that bias in your reader's world.
Very true. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. Brianna, how about for you?
Yeah, for me, I think it's ultimately a question about what the purpose of editing is, where I see it largely as a support role. So, like, if I want to tell a story, I'll write my own thing. Like, I'll write my own script, I'll write my own book. So, I'm not here to make someone's writing what I would want it to be. I'm here to support them in what their vision and what their voice is, to have it be the best version of itself possible. So Priscilla touched on it a little bit, like there's nothing more annoying as a writer, and especially a writer who is coming from some background of marginalization, to like get feedback that you didn't ask for, trying to help you achieve a goal that you don't have. So a lot of my like work as a development editor is like more in the pre-work phase, where like I ask very, very like detail-oriented questions, like what do you actually want this book to be? So like what do you want the genre to be? Who do you want this to be for? What demographics are you trying to appeal to for this? Because I'm not about to go into a book and like do a million and one criticisms about how it's not appealing to a demographic that they're not trying to appeal to. So it's really about that collaborative aspect where I can have whatever opinion I want and I can have whatever bias I want, but it's not about me because it's not my work in the end of the day. So it's about working towards the writer's goal and trying to make sure that I know what their goal is more than like my own internal goal that may or may not be biased in some way.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Brianna. I really appreciate it. Okay, so digging into this a little bit more, how do biases impact the way you read a story? Lara, would you mind starting us off with this one?
We don't always realize that certain problematic language or things are part of the story. Like, there's so much a part of our world, like ableist language, racist thing, like certain things that are so much a part of our world and our lexicon and our everyday outside of books that when you like read it, you don't necessarily see it as problematic. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't necessarily see it as problematic because it's been so normalized in, our everyday life and our work. By the time you get to a book or a script or whatever, it's just like, oh, that's. So you don't even know that the bias is there to begin with. I feel like there's like room to grow, and just listening to, marginalized communities and how they talk about their experiences and reading from their experiences firsthand.
Robin, how about for you? How do biases impact the way you read a story?
So your question reminded me of one of my favorite TED Talks, which is called "The Danger of a Single Story." A great quote from it is, "The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story." Uh, Biases tell like it feels like one chapter of what is like a whole complete story. And it leaves a lot out, and it can change a lot of people's perspective on the whole topic without realizing it. They don't realize that they've only read that one chapter instead of reading like a whole book on what someone is. Uh, Biases within stories hold a lot of power over readers in that way. And I think it's really important for writers and editors to eliminate those biases as much as they can before they spread. Like, we have the power to decide what stories are told and how the stories are told. So it's our job to make sure that it's not a single story that's told, but rather as many stories as possible.
Exactly. Thank you, Robin. Brianna, how about for you? How do biases impact the way you read a story?
Yeah, for me, I found like, the older I get, the more kind of discerning I am when reading a story and just like actually noticing the biases that are popping up that, like Lara was saying, like might not have been obvious back when I was like reading more for fun and just engaging in media consumption because it's fun to do. But engaging with it more as like a source of and reflection of and reaction to culture makes those biases much more apparent. And it reminds me a lot of like a bunch of Toni Morrison's like editing work, actually, specifically her like Playing in the Dark, I believe it's called, essay collection, where she's talking about just the lenses that the story themselves are told through and how you can identify the lens it's told through and like what audience that story is being told for. So something that I've noticed much more often is stories are only told for very certain demographics or very certain people. So a lot of my work as both a reader and as an editor has been branching out to make sure I am exposing myself and other people to stories that are not told for the same group over and over again. Because there's one thing about the writer's perspective, but it's another thing about how that work is interacting with the people actually reading it and what its intended impact on that group is.
That's so important and a great point. Thank you. And Priscilla, how do biases impact the way you read a story?
This is a question that goes straight to the heart of my experience as a teacher. I was a high school English teacher for about 16 years, and I loved doing this kind of work with students because it is so interesting when we're asked to unpack what biases we're carrying around, because a lot of times we can feel like, I don't know, I don't really have, I mean, what bias could I be carrying into the story? It's just the story, especially if it's a story that your teacher is making you read. You're like, I didn't pick this, I don't care about this. Like, how could I have an opinion? And then to unpack and realize like, oh, I have these opinions about gender roles or age or demographics of like where people are in the world, or I just assume this about these characters. And how that impacts the way we read is just so interesting to step outside of that, to say like, well, if we take this thing that we all believe is true, we all say is true because it just is, and we put it over here and we say that's not true anymore, we take that away. What's different now? And it can really transform sometimes, right? Like it can open you up to asking a question where before there was a wall of just like, this doesn't make sense or this is unrealistic, becomes, well, why would a character be doing that? Or why would they be saying that? What else is going on in their world that would create this reaction or make this choice, right? That's a huge one with reading, is sometimes, especially I think with fiction, that is like realistic fiction, that it deals with something difficult and unlikable characters or unlikable narrators, is there's this real like, no one would do this, no one would make this choice, no one would possibly act this way in this situation. And it's like, if you just take that and you take away, like, what biases are you bringing to that assumption? And if you unpack that and you like make it the reality of the story, it did happen. So instead, to approach that, well, what would lead someone to making this choice? It opens up a whole world in that text, and that we're missing if we just go in with our biases. Like, and I mean, I think there are so many metaphors that people use for bias, right? Then they all kind of come down to this idea that you're cutting off part of what you can see or what you can take in. You're removing a sense from your ability to process a story. You're taking something away from your ability to exist in that story, or to take it in. Or to even visit a story that, you know, as Briana said really well, like that might not be for you. And so if you come in with that mindset of like, I'm not the intended audience of this story, what does that do for you as a reader? And I think for me, and for I think readers who can approach with that open mindedness, it can open up a story. It can really say like, well, maybe this wasn't for me, but I can observe from the fringes of this differently than if I come in and I'm just angry that I don't have a spot, or confused that I don't have a spot here. It's like the biggest one I think that I notice with readers is the confusion that can really just suddenly shift if you're like, well, what are you bringing in that is confusing? You're confused because you have an expectation of how this is supposed to go, and it's not matching your expectation. And I find that so often with the writers that I work with, who I work with, it's like so relatable and so tragic. I feel like tragic's the wrong word. It's just sad. That I work with writers from marginalized backgrounds who often come to me. We end up working together after they've been in writing groups or partnerships with people who don't share a background with them or who don't share a marginalized background. And they have the experience of being told that their story doesn't make sense, or it needs to be more like simpler, right? There needs to be more unpacking that goes on. I had a story that was critiqued. There's just so many people at this family party. Like, how is this just a family party? There's so many people here. Welcome to being South Asian. Bewilderment, right? Of like, I can't, on page one, I don't understand what's happening. Versus when you give readers something like a science fiction story where I'm just dropping you in the middle of this sci-fi world and you're going to figure it out by book three. You're going to have some answers. And it's fine, right? Like we're in it. We want that. And the difference is ultimately like that motivation, right? But I think behind that is the bias that like I'm expecting when I open a story about a family that the family is going to look like this, but also like that's just the experience that I came with. And so like that is also, I recognize a bias that I carry, right? That when I am surprised that other readers react to this way, it's like, yeah, because I have all of this experience from the time I was a child of, being open and observational and figuring out what's going on around me. And that's not how everybody had to grow up. So it does make sense that they read differently.
Okay, so we have touched on this already in some of our comments, but as we've discussed, language and cultural sensitivities are constantly evolving, right? So, what are your personal practices for staying informed about shifting terminology, avoiding outdated perspectives that might have been considered acceptable even just a few years ago? Let's start with you for this one, Robin, if you don't mind.
I get a monthly email from Karen Yan's Conscious Style Guide. It gives a roundabout of just recent articles that discuss like language, disability, ageism, racism, sexism, like everything you can probably possibly think of. It gives about 30 something articles, I believe, in each email. And it's been a pretty good resource of just, oh, I had never even thought of that topic before. And you get to explore like new types of diversity every month. I also have Crystal Shelley's Conscious Language Toolkit, which is updated pretty regularly. I would say about once a year. I bought it once and then I didn't expect to get like a yearly update every, but it's been really nice to look through it and then see what's changed throughout the years. I'm also just like within some of these communities, like I am queer and disabled, so I am around queer and disabled authors and writers more than anyone else. Probably the only or the main people that I talk to are all queer and disabled like me. So it's really nice to like be within those communities because you get to see the language change firsthand.
Which is great. Absolutely. We'll have to make sure we put these resources in the chat for our Discord attendees. Okay, so Brianna, how about for you?
Being in community with people just in your real life is probably the easiest and most straightforward way to kind of know what needs updated and like what is like out and what is more common now and like what is like less common. So definitely the style guides are also very helpful, but I found the most helpful thing for me when I'm not sure about something is A, being honest that I'm not sure about something and not attaching like any kind of like moral weight to it or anything. Like it's not bad that I don't know a thing or I'm not sure about it. I just don't know and I need help. So I'm going to ask someone who does know. And just having people in my life who I can ask has been the most straightforward way for me to make sure that I am up to date on terminology. And that touches on something that I think is very important, both when you're working as a writer and as an editor, which is that research is the job. Like it's not some extra superfluous thing you're doing to like stay up to date on these things. Like this is literally what your job as a writer is. It's like literally what your job as an editor is to keep up to date with like linguistic terminology. So especially for like stuff like sensitivity reading and like inclusivity and stuff like that. I feel like people often like look at it as like a bonus thing that you can do if you want to get like good person points, but then they're like it's not something you have to do. But yeah, it's kind of something you have to do because it is just the job. So staying up to date on your research, I think, is very important for anyone who wants to be just in the job of writing anything.
Priscilla, how about for you?
I'm honestly just going to say everything that Briana just said, and thank you to Robin for sharing the names of those resources. That's awesome, especially to know that the contest style guide gets updated yearly. That's so cool. But yeah, I would not. I was like, oh, there go my answers. It's great. It's great to hear. I would just, I'll stress that I think that being in community with people is invaluable. In addition to your research, it's really easy for people to think that they like are staying current, and I think it's really vital to actually be talking to people, exchanging, having real conversations, not just like in passing or like liking a post. And if you don't have people in your community who you can talk to in person about that, then it's essential to find. I mean, I think we as editors also need to be in touch with sensitivity readers, in touch with beta readers. Like, do we have a professional community and a professional network that we can reach out to? If you like, the goal is not to go out and just like find a marginalized person and like, can I ask you some questions about this thing I'm reading? But if you're like, I actually don't know anything about this community or this topic, I don't actually know what language is useful right now or is okay, then I think it's not, there's nothing wrong with going to a professional. I think like sometimes people can feel a little shame around that. Like I had to ask for help, but like, no, help is very normal and necessary. And this is some people's jobs, like people on this panel. So
Exactly, right? Well said. Thank you so much. Lara, how about for you?
We just had our style guide. Yeah, I guess you could say style guide week last week in my copy editing class, and it was really useful to have access to all these different style guides and stuff. And some of them I already knew because I use them with I made my students aware of them, but some of them I didn't know. And I agree with Robin with the conscious style guide. I think that's great because it has so many resources there. I also think another resource, at least for me, and this is more on the media side, but I think it's helpful, is the Gina Davis Institute of Gender and Media. If you subscribe to their newsletter, they give they do different studies on media representation, whether it's children or women or older women or disability, and they've had different research studies and different things come out about media representation, and I think that that's really important and how to talk about language and stuff. I've seen like language and style in their guides as well, and talking especially about like disability and age and different things as well. So Gina Davis Institute is a good place to go, even though it's more like for TV film, but I think it can be applicable anywhere. I also think that not just following the style guides, but being aware of, like everyone else was saying, like different people in your different communities, and being aware that the language has changed. Even just talking to other marginalized friends of groups that you're not in, they might say, hey, like this word is outdated or this word is offensive. So just being in community with different kinds of people, whether online or in person, I think is really important. And because just they might have an awareness that you might not have. And then you can share resources with each other. And just having the awareness that language is evolving and will continue to evolve. Just having that awareness in general, because I feel like the biggest problem is that people don't have that awareness that language does change. I even feel like and this might get me some unpopular brownie points, but if there are COVID cautious people who are watching this, I even feel like the way we talk about COVID now, and there's no style guide for this, mind you, but the way journalists and people talk about COVID, they'll say, during the pandemic, meaning 2020, hey, we're still in one right now in 2026. So the way that even journalists and people talk about something like COVID, and the on taking ongoing airborne precautions and masking, affects like journalism and how we perceive, marginalized communities in our different spaces. But a lot of journalists will use other types of language during the pandemic to mean 2020. We'll, talk about masking, in past tense. We'll not talk about using N95s or whatever. There's a bias in that. Just being aware that it happens and being open to making those changes, I think makes us both better writers and better editors, because then we know how to help writers, be successful and make the best book or the best product or the best script that they can.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense. Thank you, Lara. Okay, so what are some things that beta readers should be mindful of when they're reading work by someone specifically from a marginalized community? Can I start with you, Brianna, on this one?
I think we kind of touched on this a lot already when we were talking about like how does bias impact your reading and how you can be mindful of how your bias is impacting your reading. Something that I really like to encourage people to do when they are like beta reading or alpha reading or ARC reading or any of this like pre-published reading stages is to think about like their own experience, think about like their own advantages and disadvantages, and like what someone who does not have your exact experience would not immediately intuit about your life and like your day to day. And you can kind of guess that like that's probably going to be something like this marginalized character written by this marginalized person is also like dealing with. Like they also have stuff that you are not going to immediately intuit. And I feel like grounding it in the idea that like your life have stuff that people do not know about you that's like elements of your identity impact. So just think like how that impacts people who are not you as well. So just have it be an exercise in empathy in that way before you, like Priscilla, say immediately jump to like, oh, this doesn't make sense, or like, I don't know why they're doing this, or like, no one acts like this. So, like, exercising that empathy is very important.
Very important. Thank you. Thank you so much. Priscilla, let's go to you next.
I love that you said lead with empathy, Brianna. I think that's so important. Um, I think we are often moving through the world trying to be really efficient. And that does cause us to maybe rush and think like, how can I fill in the blanks here, move this along? I know sometimes readers are impatient to get through the exposition and into the good stuff. And so they're like maybe skimming. And so I just think like if you're being asked to read someone's work as a beta reader, to approach with curiosity and to enter in with that idea of like, I am giving this my attention. I'm giving this my full attention. I'm taking time. And to really like really approach with curiosity. Basically don't put yourself in the position where you have the pen in your hand or you have the comment feature ready to go. So I would say to students, like the pen goes away, like put the pen somewhere else. And then when it was like on a computer, like put it in view mode so you can't leave comments or make changes or whatever. Like you are just reading, and like you can have a list on the side, whether that's paper or your notes on another, like on the side screen, like have a list where you're making notes of like, I had this question here, or I'm not sure why that, like, what does this mean? And then also pay attention to how often you can answer those questions on your own by just giving yourself time and moving through the story. Like that's worth noting, and I think a really great thing to share with a writer. So if you are reading on a beta level and even not on an editing level, just like as someone who's being asked to look at this, like I would say get clarity on what that writer is looking for. That's really important. And like I think Brianna said this earlier, like not providing feedback on a goal that they're not even reaching for is is really important to like what you're going to share with them. Is it helpful to give them something that's just nowhere near where they're aiming? And then yeah, just maintaining that curiosity of like what can I learn about this character or the situation or the story by reading it? What questions can I answer as I'm reading it just by giving the writer time to do what they're doing? Yeah, and just not coming in and that's just, I know it's the theme of the panel, but it's just checking that bias as much as I can, and I think as much as we can as readers is really, I think, important to being helpful in this space.
Awesome. All great exercises. Thank you so much, Priscilla. Lara, how about for you?
Yeah, I agree with what Brianna was saying about approaching, a project with empathy. And I think when you're beta reading, it is different than when you're sensitivity reading or doing a developmental edit or doing something else. But I always like to, whenever I'm doing any kind of read, you know, we're writers too, right? So we like praise. I always say like hype up, don't be afraid to like hype up the other person's work and make sure you're saying what you really like about their project and hype them up. And if you find really beautiful moments of gorgeous prose that you enjoy, or some really cool moment, or some things that you want to highlight, like make sure you say that, because I think especially as writers we want to know that the work we're doing is good. So it's not just about giving feedback as beta readers to be aware of certain things to make, like having make progress on, or things to fix in terms of plot or structure or character work, but make sure you're also praising the author, praising the writer, because you want them to feel good and you want them to know, there are going to be things when you hand a manuscript off to a beta reader that will need work or fixing, and like I'm sure the writer would know that, but you also want to know what's working, and you want to foster a positive relationship with the other writer or author. So you don't want them to quit, you don't want them to have like some negative experience. Think of it as it's a blessing and an honor to read that someone else is sharing their work with you. Like it's very personal. It's like when we are our own writing and we're sharing it with them, like it's the same thing. Like it's a very personal, vulnerable thing that they're sharing with you. So make sure you praise what's being done well, and that's part of like approaching it with empathy. So be their hype person. Don't be afraid to be their hype person while pointing out, this might need some fixing or this might need to be looked at. But be in their corner, be their cheerleader. That's just as important.
Absolutely. I agree. And making sure that as you're reading something from a marginalized community, that you're not making them feel more marginalized, right? So, absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, Robin, how about for you?
Um, I always think about, like Priscilla said, to have like a curious mindset. That's you're not going to recognize everything on the page, and you maybe be like, "Oh, that's weird," and instead of being like, "Hey, that's weird, you should change that," you should rather come out with a curious mindset of, "Oh, I'm not used to that. Is that something normal?" Or even of just researching it, being like, before I even ask, let me just do my own research real quick, make sure I'm not pointing out something weird, but to always frame it with a curious mindset, uh, just to reframe it like a conversation away from judgment. Because I think that if you bring judgment to the table, that's really going to harm. And all the positive feedback, like Laura said as well, I always start my developmental edits by saying everything that I loved about their piece. And if I could find a sentence or some dialogue that I like really loved, I'm like, here's my favorite lines from the piece, trying to like really emphasize that it's not just we're here to fix everything about you. It's you have a lot of good qualities. We're just also here to help you grow as a writer.
which obviously builds that connection with the author as well, but it gives them that maybe baseline understanding that this person is working with me and they actually did like read and absorb my writing, right?
Yeah.
So that's also very helpful. Thank you for that. I appreciate it, Robin. Okay, so I know that you can't necessarily do a checklist when it comes to like the functions of the brain, but do you have any maybe tips or suggestions? Like, what can writers do to learn to recognize their own biases while they're self-editing their work long before it goes to anyone reading it? Priscilla, can we start with you on this one?
think my brain blanked because you said you can't give a checklist. And my brain was like, challenge accepted. I would like to turn that down. So I find this uniquely challenging when I'm working with writers because so often I'm working with writers who come to me because they're like, I'm trying, they're looking for us like a safer place to be, right? Like I feel like I've been really harshly judged in sharing this work. And so now I found this place. And so it can be really challenging to then to be like, yes, and there's still work for us to do as writers. In like interrogating our own work. I do a lot of work with self-revision though. Like I host a monthly self-revision space. And I also with my in my writing retreats, I really just champion self-revision. And I'm often so surprised that writers hate revisions so much. Not because I necessarily love it, but I'm like, that's what you do. Like now we revise. And because I am a curious person when writers are just consistently being like, oh, revision, ew. I'm like, let's talk about that. Like, what don't you like about it? And it's often this feeling of like, I don't know how to step outside of myself as the writer. I don't know how to step into the reader mindset. And I think there are a lot of ways to do that, and different things work for different people. So this does not necessarily work for me, but what I found some writers really like to do is essentially role play, but to really like take on this persona of this, like, what if I were a totally different person? And I had a friend of mine who literally that person has like a different name and a different gender. And this like complete, and she's like, I am now this person, and like puts on her metaphorical hat. And it's like kind of the gamification of it, right? I think it just like helps to really break the tension of like, this is hard, and it's weird. And so like, why not just lean into the weird and make it kind of goofy? I think whatever gets you into that mindset is fine. However you can get in there. And otherwise, a big one I think really is, even though it's self-editing, it's like you're not actually ever alone. We feel really lonely as writers, but I think like really we aren't, and we shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like the goal for us to do this all by ourselves. And the best things that I create, they've all come from community efforts. They've all come from support and feedback and input from people in my community. And I think that's so important to really just acknowledge like they're all a part of the process. Um, and I think that's really helpful in like it is self-editing, but you might approach that with, I tell like read this out loud to somebody, share this with someone, and just ask them to take that stance of curiosity of like, this is where I had this question, or this is a place where I wasn't really sure what was happening here. But for writers to do that for their own work, like where is this really working? And because I think it's not just about relationship building to highlight what's working. I think it's really good feedback. And I think that's kind of undervalued in feedback. A lot of us come out of very critical workshops that are heavy on the tearing apart and the like bloody red pen kind of approach to writing. And I don't think we then get a sense of what our voices really are if we also don't know when we're singing and when it's really resonating. And I think that having someone else do that for you can be like a way to kind of learn that, to pick up that ear of like, this is what I'm looking for when I need to step outside of it, especially in working with memoir and personal narrative and really like personal nonfiction. A lot of people are coming to those genres to tell a story that is essentially a processing of trauma. And I don't think there's anything wrong with using writing as a process of trauma. I do think that sometimes we can feel really attached the to what happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what belongs on the page, and that there is a bias in carrying that, right? And saying like, well, I want people to know that this is what it was really like. But like the cost of that, right? What are you doing to your reader? And also, what are you doing to your work ultimately if the work itself is so traumatizing to read? Are you giving voice to those characters, that story? Does it actually become healing? So I think like the asking the question of like, does this belong here? But that can be really hard when is important, but that can be really hard when you're up close, right? When it's like, this is very close to me, and possibly is not like something that I've really fully processed or thought about how to tell this story publicly yet. And so that's where another person can be really helpful because someone from the outside can say like, as the reader, this is the experience I'm having. And then that takes me back to my original question as the writer of like, what do I want? What do I want my readers to feel? What do I want people to walk away with? And I would say even at like my most hurt and unhealed, I didn't actually want people to walk away feeling traumatized by what I had experienced. I wanted people to understand. And so that really put the craft question back on me, is like, how can I do this, right? How can I balance both of these? Which led to a lot of reading and a lot of revising and a lot of thinking about that. And so I've spent so much time with like thinking about my work inside of myself and outside of myself, in my head and like from someone else's perspective, that it makes sense to me that like that you need to really do this like shift, right? Of like, how do I shift out of the story away from the page? How do I get farther away?
Absolutely. Okay, so then Lara, how about for you? Do you have any suggestions or tips on how writers can recognize their own biases when they're doing their self-editing?
I think just learning about being in community with other writers who are marginalized and learning about other groups and other types of people. I mean, you don't necessarily have to read style guides or anything, but just being aware that, there are other kinds of things, and because there's that, there are biases from that, and just, expanding on their own reading. I feel like reading, books from authors that, belong to other marginalized groups or experiences might widen their own horizons. I think reading is really powerful and might, influence their writing as well and could give them ideas, especially as I feel like a lot of writers are readers anyway, and I feel like we all get inspired by different books and pieces of media. Um, I also really like Priscilla's the point about with with memoir and nonfiction. I thought that was really interesting because you're writing from your own personal perspective, but how much is too much, and are you going to trauma dump or whatever. And I feel like while writing can be very healing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or script or whatever, I don't feel like we owe everyone our pain or our trauma necessarily. Like, we can have it as like a form to like, express ourselves for ourselves, but we have to do it because it's for ourselves as writers. We don't like owe it to our abusers to like, to like exploit, like they're like, this is not, that kind of thing. And I think that like that was also something that I had to, reckon with my own writing. I'm like, well, if the story I write gets published now, or gets published in the future, you don't know what other people are going to think, but like, we don't owe that to anybody. But just having that awareness of like, I need to take care of myself first before I put that on the page. You should be approaching, I think, your own writing with a sense of empathy and care and, you know, acknowledgement that you are coming in with a certain bias or a certain perspective, because that is your own experience. So that is your bias, and that's important too.
Exactly. Great point. Thank you, Lara. Robin, do you have any suggestions on how writers can maybe recognize their own biases while they're self-editing?
I think my main tip is just to listen to people outside of your community and even within your community to not only hear directly from them, but to really hear what they're saying and listen to what they're saying, like to read their books, listen to their slam poetry, their TED Talks, their articles, their podcasts, anything. Having that all those different perspectives like in front of you really does change how you think about the world. And it does help with confronting those biases, even in your own work, because you're able to recognize them then. I also challenged the checklists that you were talking about. Um, there is what's called, I think it's from Northwestern University. It's called the social identity wheel. So it's like just wheel, but it has what's closer in the front is what is the people who are like on top. So you have like white people who are on top, and then the farther away is more marginalized and all these different communities, and they have 12 different areas for it. So it's like age, disability, your legal status, your language, your gender, and religion, and everything like that. And you can kind of just like look at the wheel and then sit there and be like, okay, do I have all of these? Or, you don't have to have all of these, but do I have some of these? Or am I really leaning toward a certain area? Make a story diverse, they only really pick like one area. Like I got that one queer character, I'm done. I don't need to do anything else. And there's so many different ways to be diverse within the world. So it's kind of like a cool little checklist. You can just go through all the 12 different areas of the social identity wheel and see how your story relates. And if there's anywhere you want to push, or if you're like, I don't really fit that area, I'm like, let's go, it's cool. You don't have to do it, but it's a cool way to check on that before you go to betas.
Yeah, a good resource too. Thank you so much. Okay, Brianna, why don't you wrap us up?
I first just want to say like ditto to what everyone else already said, because it was all very good advice to begin with. And for me, I approach like self-editing and like try to encourage other people to ex approach self-editing as like kind of just like this act of like more radical honesty and like radical self-awareness. So like, you just need to sit there and like know what you're not good at. Essentially, like you need to know what you do not know. You have to know the criticisms that you've been given in the past. Say like, all right, is this in this new thing I am writing? So I don't really approach it any differently than I would say like, oh, hey, Brianna, you wrote the word just like 15 times over the span of like 300 words. Maybe take that out. So like knowing the word just is one of my weaknesses is just part of that self-awareness. And then knowing that there are like spots that I have that I am not aware of and like just like flubs that I have made in the past that I have needed help with. Like, oh, I should probably be on the lookout for that in this new thing I'm working on because that's something that I've needed improvement with in the past. And I feel like lots of people feel like bad about acknowledging where they need like improvement in craft in that way. So like especially like with Priscilla's case where like people are like pouring their hearts out into this thing. So it's kind of difficult to be like, oh yeah, I should probably like brush up on how I structure a paragraph too. But it is ultimately a craft skill that I think you just need to be very honest about what areas you need to practice more with and to like specifically address bias. I feel like 90% of like the controversies of like where did this person's editor go? Like why didn't they have a sensitivity reader? Wasn't even in cases where they had like a quote unquote diverse character. It's literally just like they're like a straight white writer who wrote a straight white character who said or thought something problematic. So it's a situation where they don't even think they need any outside help. So that's another area of just being self-aware of like, all right, what biases am I just bringing to this character by default? And should I make sure that I'm not being weird when I'm writing stuff from their perspective? Because yeah, that has been a problem for lots of people.
It's true, and I'm already thinking of examples. I'm sure we can all think of a couple on any given day. So yeah, I agree and thank you, Brianna. Appreciate it. Okay, so from the perspective of working as an editor with an author, and you've really identified something in their work that is very problematic, how do you maintain your supportive partnership with them while talking with them about maybe some necessary changes that you're recommending? Lara, can we start with you?
I actually have a story for this one. I had a situation where I was doing a beta read for an author. This was, I think, before I even started sensitivity reading, but I had this awareness of, ableist language and other things, and I have more awareness now, but I was just using the awareness I had back then, and we decided to, swap writing or whatever, and I was reading something for her, and I pointed out very nicely, like, I was so nice, like, it was nothing that I, said wrong or inappropriately, and I should also give context that she's a white queer woman, um, and I had said very nicely, I pointed out, like, hey, there's some ableist language in your story. Her response to that was that she felt spanked. And this was her word, not mine. And she said, I have no issue fixing the racist language and other bits, but does this mean I'm ableist? This is not a mirror I enjoy looking into. And she just wouldn't, like, that was her response to me, like, written response. I just couldn't believe that, like, I was just trying to, like, help her, make her writing, better, like I was saying earlier. And, like, you don't have to respond that way. Like, I haven't had an incident like that since, so I don't know what I would do. Like, it hasn't happened in so much of a professional context. People have pointed out things to me. I don't get offended. I'm like, great, I'll fix it. Thank you for making me aware. We're not trying to attack you. We are trying to help you make your books and scripts and stories better. I don't know how I would handle another situation if that happened in a more professional context. I would probably try to find a way to, amicably part after that project, and and nothing really prepares you for that either. Like, I wasn't prepared for a response like that.
Robin, how about you? How would you approach that conversation with an author?
If I'm doing a copy edit, I only change it. Like, I'll give an example of how to change it within the text and then I'll mark it. But for copying, developmental, anything, I usually address it within the editorial letter. So I lean toward having a softer approach because I don't want to seem upset or like aggressive or anything about it. But I find that when I start it as a conversation between me and the writer, that they're more willing to listen to my side and have just they usually handle it better because when you start with blame or anger, writers tend to tune that out. Um, I think it also helps to have resources. So, like, I have a quote from Crystal Shelley in my editorial letter. Um, and it's a quote that mentions that even if the language is not harmful to me, that it doesn't mean it's not harmful or it doesn't exclude other people. So it's a quote that many writers have been like inspired from and like came back and were like, oh, I really like that quote that you added and made me actually think about this a little more, which is pretty cool. I also use links as well to show that it's not just me bringing this topic to the table, but others have talked about it before and have addressed it before. And it usually just helps them see that this has been going on, even if they haven't really been seeing people talk about it. And then I usually end by emphasizing that this is for the readers, that I'm not putting this out to tell them that they're a bad person or that anything is going wrong. It's a different mindset to have. And if you want to, this could help your readers connect to your story more. And if not, it's 100% up to you.
That's great. Thank you. Great tips. Brianna, how about for you? How would you approach this?
And this is another area where I do a lot of pre-work before I even get into anything. So in my like onboarding process, I have an entire part about like how do you want your feedback to be given to you? Do you want it to be direct? Do you need like a compliment sandwich? Do you want like frequent, like positive feedback with like intermittent criticism? Do you want all the criticism all at once? Like, what do you want? Because I feel like my default editing style is to just be like brutal and like red pin it. So I realized very quickly that that makes writers very unhappy. So it's like, all right, what kind of feedback style do you actually find helpful and what do you find discouraging? And asking people to like actually answer that question and like think about it if they haven't thought about it, I found is like very helpful because some writers you can just be very direct and be like, I am flagging this for ableism, fix it. And you don't have to like say anything else. And they're cool and they don't make a big deal out of it. And some people need to have like a much gentler approach. Just because like especially in the United States, we have like this culture of like critique, once again, being an attack or critique being an accusation of morality or an accusation of you're a bad person now because you made this mistake. So I try to really like nail home from the beginning that like when I am critiquing you, I'm not like judging your status as a person. Like I am critiquing your manuscripts and like making sure your manuscript is good. And I also pull some quotes. I do a lot from like a very like tiny, tiny little book. It's called Conflict is Not Abuse by, I want to say Sarah Schulman. Let me look it up. Sarah Schulman, yes. Where it's essentially just talking about how someone like saying something that makes you uncomfortable is not automatically something that you need to feel attacked by, because like discomfort is how growth in conversation happens. And just being very, very clear from the get-go that some of these things might make you uncomfortable, especially if I'm doing a sensitivity read. And like, that is fine. No one's talking about like your morality alignment or anything when we're doing an edit letter.
I could see how that would be like a huge help to have that laid out for you in advance. So that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Priscilla, how about for you?
These are all such great suggestions. I think a thing that's been helpful for me on the editing end is to remember, as Lara said, like writers can and will decide whether or not they're going to take your feedback. And there is like a hands up kind of thing I have to do. It's like, all right, well, I did it. I gave you this, and like you're going to do with it what you will. That was difficult for me when I started because I really felt like a lot of responsibility for like this. I have to say this perfectly so that it will be received and it will change this, and then this book will be better for it. And if I can't get someone to see it this way, then I've let them down. I've let the readers down, and oh no. And really having to acknowledge like I don't have that much power in the end. Like I am trying to help, but like I can't be responsible for whether or not that gets taken. And that's a helpful shift for a lot of reasons. Like one, it really does take some things off of my shoulders. I think a lot of people come to editing with a recovering perfectionism. So if you are in that boat, really take some pressure off yourself. And the other thing that's been helpful is it has allowed me to feel better about being more direct if that's the best approach with a client. To not feel like it's my responsibility to like hide the vegetables, like no, it's not. There's no broccoli. It's really big. It's in there, but like maybe you won't notice. And really like find the perfect way to say this, where like the perfect way might be the most direct way, if that's what this client needs, or you know, that I can name something. It is challenging. It's not to underplay how challenging it is. Like we do get very attached to our identities as good or bad people, right? Like as good people, we all want to be good people. And if we do any, and like that, some people can make that about like anything that they do that invites criticism, or anything they do that gets called in is as a sign that they're a bad person. It's someone calling them a bad person. And that's like, you know, I start all of my workshops. I start every conversation with clients, like from the beginning, the first intake, I start with like, everyone's learning. And like we're all learning and acknowledging that like things have changed. Like language continues to change. The way we relate to each other continues to change. We know more. And I have that quote from Maya Angelou that when we know better, we do better. I love the quote that you shared, Robin, about just because it's not harmful to me, right, doesn't mean it's not to someone else. And I think that's been helpful for a lot of writers I've worked with, that to explain the impact of something, whether it's the intention or not, right? So we have the sort of soundbite or memeified quote is that like intention is an impact. But like what that really means, to really unpack that and say like you might think you're doing this, right? You might think you're creating this kind of character because you're using this language, or that might be the intention. But like, here's the impact of that. And like, what this really, it doesn't mean like you can't do something as much as it means like, what is it going to do to the story? What is the impact? And is there another way to do this? And that kind of brings it back around to craft and away from you're a bad person for doing this. Is there a craft move we can make here? I love giving some kind of source for that too. Like, here's this writer. So like, I just like, again, your research is so important. It is the job. I have this article or this podcast or this interview or this snippet or this book recommendation. Like, here's a writer who's going through that, who like makes this choice, right? Like, here's how a writer did make a different choice. Here's a writer talking about craft. Melissa Phoebus's book, that the name is Bodywork, I think is a great one, because there's so much about identity and how language can work, right? Like the work of language, and also the work of story building, right? That it's not just about necessarily word choices, but like the moves that are happening, the what stereotypes are alive in the story, what tropes are you maybe holding up that like this is how that can land for readers. I do incorporate like what's the best way for you to get feedback, and not so much in the like choose whatever and I'll do it because I'm stubborn, but more like this is how I tend to this is how I tend to give feedback. Like, and I also start all of my my developmental editing consultations with the acknowledgement that this is uncomfortable. It's very normal for it to be uncomfortable, because I think like sometimes like if you don't go into it with that expectation, you might go in thinking like I have to do this the right way, right? I have to absorb this criticism, and I have to not I have to win, right? I have to get an A on my book. Like there shouldn't be any criticism or any changes that I need to make. And instead to say like I'm gonna find something, that's why you've hired me. I'm gonna give you suggestions because you're asking me to do that. And I'm going to honor your intentions. Like this is what you want. So I'm looking for like where is that working and where are things getting in the way of that? And this can be a really uncomfortable process because you're sharing something very vulnerable with me. Yeah, I have some clients where I even like we talk about ways to kind of mitigate that. Like we end with like, so here are some like, what are you going to do to take care of yourself? Like you just did this big scary thing. Don't sit here and like stare at your book and tear it apart, or stare at your draft and think like, oh my God, I messed this whole thing up. Like what, go do something nice for yourself. Take a break from this, go for a walk, breathe air that's not in front of like, being superheated by your computer. Get away from this. I always phrase my suggestions with that kind of language of like, consider doing this. We think about doing this because one, it's an acknowledgement. Like I'm not telling you did this wrong and you have to fix it, or you lose, or you like, you get an F. But also that is what I'm asking you to do, is to really think about this idea, right? Like you maybe haven't thought about it from this perspective. And so like, think about this and what shifts for you. And for the most part, I mean, I've been really fortunate that I've only really had one client who's come back from a feedback round like, yeah, this isn't for me. Like we should not be working together. And that really like, being able to say like, okay, like I did my best to show you an interpretation of this, like how this would land, and you made a choice, and it is disappointing. I think Lara use that word, and that's exactly how it feels. It feels disappointing, but like not. I think that really maintaining that perspective has been helpful.
Great answers. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And I think I'm not alone. Our viewers are probably in agreement that all four of you are amazing. We really appreciate your insights. I hate to say it, but this does wrap up our panel for today. There's honestly so much more we could discuss on this topic, as I'm sure you can tell. Some of the keywords that have stood out for me have been empathy, curiosity, and research from our panelists. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Also, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't point out that In our Right Hive Discord channels, we also have a lot of great conversations like this, and I encourage you to join us there if you're not already outside of our conference. So, with that, I would like to thank our panelists for their time walking us through their best practices on how we can check our biases. We will stay in the Discord chat a little longer to continue answering questions from our attendees, and we will also make sure that our panelists post and pin some of their helpful resources for mindful editing. But to wrap up the conversation today, why don't we go around the room and briefly let our viewers know what projects you might be working on, anything you'd like to plug, and how we can find you after the conference if you would like to be found. So, Priscilla, let's just stay with you for this one.
Thank you so much. I just want to say really quickly, like this, you're echoing Stefanie, you're all amazing. And I was so excited to be in the space with you and learn from all of you. And yeah, thanks for having me, Right Hive. I am in early enough stages in this project to not know what to call it. It might be a book, who knows? And if you are looking for any creative writing support spaces, whether like whatever genre, whatever you're looking for, I run 3 monthly writing spaces through my newsletter, which is currently on Substack. I don't know how long it will be there, but that's called Working in Progress. It's workinginprogress.substack.com. And I also run 3 events a year through Campfire Creatives, and you can find us on Instagram at Campfire Create. This will be right in the middle of our summer event, which is Camp Right Start, and it's a month-long virtual retreat where we just get to enjoy all the fun things about summer camp and writing, and we love it. And we have Harvest Week coming up in the fall, which is a week-long event if you're just looking for a little creative reset. And then you could join us in January for Right Start if you're looking for something that gets your writing started at the beginning of the year and is not a write your book in 30 days boot camp, because we do not do that. Really enjoy connecting with new writers. So if you want to follow any of those things, you can find all of that at my website, which is just wordsbypriscilla.com, or on my Instagram at wordsbypriscilla. There pretty often you'll see a lot of cat pictures, but they're cute. So
Thank you. We love cat pictures here, so definitely be checking it out. Lara, how about for you? Anything you'd like to promote, or how can we find you after the conference?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. All the panelists were so wonderful, and I'm so glad that I got to be on a panel talking about sensitivity reading and editing. It's really cool. This is my, I think, 4th year with Right Hive. I started with them in 2023, so I'm always grateful to come back and chat on different panels. You could find me at True Cherry Girl. That's TRU Cherry Girl. There is no E. Yes, it's from a show. And like pretty much on all platforms: Blue Sky, Instagram, X, Twitter, like everywhere. I do keep most of my accounts private, so just request to follow me. I also teach writing classes with Women on Writing. By the time this goes up, I might be in the middle of teaching it. It's a writing fantasy fiction class that I'm supposed to start teaching in June, but I might have to postpone it. It's an 8-week class, so if you're a fantasy writer, and I haven't started teaching it yet, it's with Women on Writing. If you Google Women on Writing, you can find it under their classes tab. I also teach a class with them called Writing Disabled Characters in Fiction, and I should be teaching that with them next year. But if you are a disabled writer and write YA, or if you want to write something else, I'm also open to that. And then you don't necessarily have to be disabled, but I welcome other marginalized writers. I am also happy to accommodate you with whatever you need. I'm also working on an adult contemporary romance novel that I hope to be querying by the time this panel goes up. And it's a sapphic ace romance about 2 disabled girls, well, the one main character, a disabled girl who meets another disabled girl on a forum of their favorite TV show in 2004, and it goes from 2004 to 2017, and it's like a friends to lovers romance about how they fall in love, but it's like about online friendships and stuff, and it's my heart book. And if you are a fan of the very niche Fox show True Calling, you will love this book. So there's that, and then I also offer sensitivity reading services. You can also find my page through Women on Writing, and they will forward you my email. They will forward the email to me, and then I will email you back if you need a sensitivity reader for disability representation, Egyptian representation, asexual rep, anything like academic and disability studies, humanities, film and TV. I read for all kinds of things. So I'm always open to help other authors with their work, whether they're doing traditional publishing or indie publishing. That's pretty much it for me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lara. Robin, how about for you? Anything you'd like to promote and how we can find you after the conference?
To promote, I have a free giveaway for a query letter edit for disabled and queer writers. If you'd like to submit to that, you can find on my website, justdragoneditingservices.com. I'm also on Blue Sky and Tumblr. Just started it, so it will be a newish account, but it's at Dragon Editing.
Perfect. Thank you. And Briana, anything you'd like to promote and how can we find you after the conference?
And so for now, you can get which way am I doing it? Other way. That book, if you would like a book, it literally just came out, so I am still in the thank God my book is finally out, so I don't have to work on it anymore phase of things. So if you like spooky horror books, that is what that is. I am currently working on querying a short story speculative fiction collection that will hopefully come out next year, fingers crossed. And for finding me online, so you can look at briannaincoxwriter.com, where you can see like all of my like panel appearances and like book tours stuff. And also look at my developmental editing services, like all the links are there. I also offer very sporadic online writing workshops just via Zoom. The most recent one was on writing diverse character perspectives. So most of them are like character writing focused. So if you would like to stay up to date on that one, I have Ko-fi, don't know how to pronounce it. That's also linked on my writer website, briannaincoxwriter.com. And connecting on social media, where I would also make announcements about that kind of thing. It is at Pedro Paro 2. It is a Pedro Paramo reference. But so yeah, I do lots of book references and book recommendations and stuff there. So no cat tax, unfortunately, but a lot of book covers.
Okay, we'll take that too. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that does it for this panel. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and we can't wait to see you on the Write Hive Discord. On behalf of Write Hive, we thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you soon.